Welcome to Crime Unveiled Podcast. Dive deep into the mysteries that captivate us. If you appreciate this episode, please consider liking and subscribing to support us. The fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, 1888. A time of gas lamps and horse-drawn carriages, but also a time of deep shadows and unspeakable horrors. We delve into the chilling tale of Jack the Ripper, a name that echoes through history, synonymous with terror and unanswered questions. Over 10 episodes, we will dissect the known facts, explore the various theories, and attempt to understand the dark mind of a killer who continues to fascinate and horrify more than a century later. This is not just a story of murder, but a glimpse into the social and political climate of a city gripped by fear. The Autumn of Terror, as it came to be known, began quietly, almost insidiously. The first victims, often overlooked in the grand narrative, were women living on the fringes of society in the impoverished and densely populated Whitechapel district. These were women who worked as prostitutes, their lives already precarious and vulnerable. It was a time of significant social inequality, and these women were often seen as disposable, their disappearances barely registering in the larger consciousness of the city. The initial reports were treated as routine, another unfortunate incident in a district known for its lawlessness. But the pattern, the brutal nature of the crimes, soon began to suggest something far more sinister was at work. The first canonical victim, Ann Nichols, was discovered on August 31, 1888. Her throat had been deeply slashed and her abdomen mutilated. The savagery of the attack was unlike anything the police had seen before. It immediately set the case apart from other violent crimes in the area. Location: Bucks Row, a narrow, dimly lit street, became the first marker on a grim map of terror. It was a stark contrast to the grand boulevards and bustling markets of the city, a hidden world where darkness thrived. The discovery sent a ripple of fear through the community, a premonition of the horrors to come. Just a week later, on September 8th, Annie Chapman was found murdered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. The brutality escalated. Her abdomen was ripped open, and some of her internal organs were missing. This gruesome detail ignited a firestorm of speculation and fear. Who was capable of such savagery? The press, eager for a story, seized upon the details, often sensationalizing and exaggerating the facts. This fueled public anxiety and created a climate of hysteria. The unknown killer was given a name: Jack the Ripper, taken from a letter supposedly written by the perpetrator, though its authenticity has always been debated. The Ripper's reign of terror continued with the double murder on September 30th, known as the Double Event. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were killed within an hour of each other, in different locations. Stride's throat was cut, but her body was otherwise relatively unmarked, suggesting the killer may have been interrupted. Eddowes, however, suffered a similar fate to Chapman, her abdomen mutilated and a kidney removed. This rapid succession of killings intensified the panic gripping London. The police were under immense pressure to find the culprit, but the fog-bound streets and lack of forensic techniques hampered their investigation. The sheer audacity of committing two murders in such a short span of time and in close proximity pointed to a killer who was growing bolder, more confident. The removal of organs, specifically the kidney in Eddowes' case, fueled speculation about the killer's possible medical knowledge or perhaps some morbid fascination with anatomy. These details captured the public's imagination and led to countless theories, ranging from the plausible to the outlandish. The city was on edge. Every shadow seemed to harbor a threat. Vigilante groups patrolled the streets, hoping to catch the elusive killer. The final canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was murdered on November 9th. Her mutilated body was discovered in her room in Miller's Court. This was the most brutal of all the Ripper murders, the extent of the mutilations far exceeding the previous victims. The sheer savagery of the attack shocked even the most hardened investigators. The room was a scene of unimaginable horror. The fact that the murder took place indoors, in the supposed safety of her own room, heightened the sense of vulnerability and fear. It suggested that nowhere was safe from the Ripper's reach. Kelly's murder marked a terrifying climax to the Ripper's reign of terror. After her, the killings abruptly stopped. The sudden silence was almost as unsettling as the violence that preceded it. Did the Ripper die? Flee the country? Or simply decide to stop? These questions have haunted investigators and historians for over a century. The lack of a definitive answer has only added to the enduring mystery of Jack the Ripper. Despite countless investigations, books, and documentaries, his identity remains shrouded in darkness, a chilling reminder of the unanswered questions that linger in the annals of criminal history. Before the terror descended, Whitechapel was a vibrant, bustling community. Imagine the cobbled streets, slick with rain and mud, the gas lamps casting a flickering, ethereal glow on the crowded tenements. The air, thick with the smells of coal smoke, stale beer, and the ever-present scent of poverty, hung heavy over the district. Market stalls overflowed with produce, vendors hawking their wares with booming voices, creating a constant, low hum of activity. Children played in the narrow alleyways, their laughter echoing off the brick walls. Life, despite its hardships, pulsed with a raw energy. It's important to understand this backdrop, to grasp the sheer contrast of the brutality that was about to shatter this fragile peace. Yes, the contrast is indeed stark. The victims, predominantly women living in precarious circumstances, were part of this vibrant tapestry. They walked these very streets, navigating the labyrinthine alleys and crowded marketplaces. They too breathed the smoky air, heard the cries of the vendors, and witnessed the everyday hustle of Whitechapel. Consider their lives, their daily routines, the search for work, the struggle for survival in a society that often marginalized and overlooked them. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, friends, individuals with hopes, dreams, and fears, just like anyone else. The Ripper's intrusion into their lives was not just an attack on them personally, but a violation of the entire community, a tearing of the social fabric. Let's delve deeper into the lives of these women. Many worked as prostitutes, a desperate measure for survival in an era of limited opportunities. Their nights were spent navigating the dimly lit streets, seeking clients to make ends meet. Imagine the constant fear, the vulnerability they faced each night as they walked the same paths that would soon become synonymous with terror. They were not just nameless victims. They were individuals trying to survive in a harsh world. Their stories, their lives, deserve to be remembered and understood beyond the context of their tragic deaths. Absolutely. One can almost picture the scene. A cool autumn evening, the gas lamps casting long, distorted shadows, the clip-clop of horses' hooves on the cobblestones, the distant sounds of music spilling out from a pub. A woman walks alone, her shawl pulled tight against the chill, her thoughts perhaps on the meager meal she hopes to afford, or the safety of her lodging. The very ordinariness of such a scene makes the intrusion of violence all the more shocking, the disruption of life all the more profound. This is what we must keep in mind as we examine the events that unfolded. The daily rhythms of Whitechapel, the sounds, the smells, the sights, these details help us understand the human element of this story. The women were not just statistics. They were part of a living, breathing community. Their lives, however difficult, had value. The Ripper's actions extinguished that value, leaving a void in the community, a scar that would never truly heal. And this is what makes his crimes so heinous, so deeply disturbing. The sheer contrast between the mundane routines of daily life and the brutal intrusion of violence underscores the terror that gripped Whitechapel. Imagine the fear that permeated the community, the whispers in the dark alleys, the suspicion that fell upon every stranger. The Ripper's actions didn't just take lives. They eroded the very fabric of trust and security that held the community together. This pervasive fear is crucial to understanding the impact of the Ripper's crimes. Indeed, the Ripper's reign of terror was more than just a series of individual murders. It was an assault on the community itself, a shattering of the illusion of safety in the most vulnerable corners of society. By understanding the context of life in Whitechapel, we can better grasp the magnitude of the fear and the devastating impact of these crimes on the community as a whole. Precisely, and by understanding the lives of the women who fell victim to the Ripper, we can move beyond the sensationalized narrative and recognize them as individuals whose stories, though tragically cut short, deserve to be remembered and honored. They were not just victims. They were members of a community, and their lives, however challenging, held value and meaning. Let's delve deeper into the Whitechapel district as it was in 1888. Imagine the cobbled streets, gas lamps casting flickering shadows, the bustling market stalls by day giving way to an eerie quiet at night. Most residents were working class, living in crowded tenements. Poverty was rife, and the streets were often filled with the sounds of vendors, children playing, and the clip-clop of horse-drawn carriages. This vibrant yet vulnerable community became the backdrop for a series of brutal murders that continue to haunt us today. It's crucial to understand the everyday life of the area to grasp the context of the Ripper's terror. This normality, this routine, was shattered by the intrusion of an unseen predator.
Precisely. Life in Whitechapel had a certain rhythm, a predictability. Women went about their daily routines, many working late into the night to make ends meet. Imagine them walking home through the dimly lit alleys, perhaps stopping to chat with a neighbor or purchase a late-night snack. This ordinary existence was disrupted by the emergence of a figure, a shadow, who preyed on these women. The Ripper's actions instilled fear into the very fabric of the community, turning the familiar streets into places of dread. The contrast between the everyday and the horrific is a key element in understanding the impact of these crimes.
The autumn of 1888 was particularly damp and foggy, adding to the sense of unease. The fog, thick and swirling, provided cover for the Ripper, shrouding his movements in mystery. It also amplified the sense of vulnerability among the residents. Imagine the fear of walking home alone through those fog-choked streets, knowing that a killer might be lurking just beyond visibility. The weather itself became an accomplice to the crimes, heightening the tension and the terror. It allowed the Ripper to move unseen, adding another layer of complexity to the investigation. The fog also contributed to the difficulty in gathering reliable witness accounts. Visibility was severely limited, and sounds were distorted. This hampered the police investigation, making it challenging to piece together a clear picture of the Ripper's movements. Many witnesses reported seeing figures in the fog, but these accounts were often contradictory and unreliable. The fog became a barrier, obscuring the truth and allowing the Ripper to remain elusive. It also fostered an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion within the community. We need to picture a typical evening in Whitechapel. Families gathered in their small apartments, the aroma of cooking filling the air, street vendors called out their wares, and the pubs buzzed with activity. Children played games in the narrow streets, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. This was the scene, the backdrop, against which the Ripper's crimes unfolded. It makes the intrusion of violence even more stark, more disturbing. The contrast between the ordinary and the extraordinary is at the heart of this story. Yes, and within this vibrant community, certain individuals were more vulnerable than others. Many of the Ripper's victims were women living on the margins of society, engaging in sex work to survive. They moved through the streets late at night, often alone and unseen. This made them easy targets for a predator who knew how to exploit the shadows and the anonymity of the district. Their marginalized status also meant that their disappearances were often not immediately reported, giving the Ripper more time to escape. The social dynamics of Whitechapel are crucial to understanding the context of these crimes. Poverty, desperation, and social inequalities created a breeding ground for vulnerability. The Ripper preyed upon those who were already struggling, those who were least likely to be missed or protected. This makes his crimes even more tragic and underscores the complex social issues of the era. It's a stark reminder of the dark underbelly of Victorian society.
The Ripper's actions didn't just take lives, they shattered the sense of security in Whitechapel. The familiar streets became dangerous, and the shadows held a new, sinister meaning. The everyday routines of life were disrupted, replaced by fear and suspicion. The ripple effect of these crimes extended far beyond the immediate victims, impacting the entire community and leaving an enduring scar on the city.
Let's delve into the first officially recognized victim of the Whitechapel murders, Mary Nichols. On August 31, 1888, at approximately 3:40 a.m., her body was discovered on Bucks Row, Whitechapel. The location itself speaks volumes about the area, a network of impoverished streets and alleyways providing ample cover for such a crime. Two cart drivers, Charles Cross and Robert Paul, initially found her. They thought she was simply another unfortunate soul sleeping rough, a common sight in the areas. However, upon closer inspection, the horrific reality became clear. Nichols' throat had been slit, twice, deep and brutal incisions that severed her windpipe. This initial discovery sets the chilling tone for the horrors to come. The brutality didn't end there. Further examination of Mary Nichols' body revealed even more gruesome details. Her abdomen had been mutilated with a deep, jagged wound, and several other incisions across her stomach suggested a frenzied attack. The precision and savagery of these wounds led investigators to believe the perpetrator possessed some anatomical knowledge, perhaps a butcher or someone familiar with the handling of knives and human anatomy. This detail added another layer of fear to the already grim situation. The idea of someone with such knowledge prowling the streets of Whitechapel instilled a deeper sense of dread amongst the residents. The newspapers, already buzzing with the discovery, quickly picked up on this detail, fueling the growing public hysteria.
The condition of Mary Nichols' clothing further complicated the scene. Her skirt was pulled up above her waist, suggesting a sexual element to the crimes. However, the initial police reports didn't give this detail much weight. It's worth noting that the Victorian era had a complex and often puritanical view on matters of sexuality. This might have influenced how the investigators interpreted and documented the evidence. The dismissive attitude towards this aspect of the crime possibly hindered the early investigation, diverting focus from a potentially crucial piece of the puzzle. This could have played a significant role in the Ripper's ability to evade capture. Let's consider the timeline leading up to Mary Nichols' death. She had spent the evening of August 30th drinking with friends, later being ejected from a lodging house for lack of funds. She told her friends she would quickly earn the 4p needed for a bed, suggesting prostitution as the likely means. This highlights the precarious situation of many women in Whitechapel, forced into such circumstances due to poverty and lack of opportunity. It also places Mary Nichols firmly within the vulnerable demographic targeted by the Ripper. This understanding of her social context is crucial in reconstructing the events of that night. The last confirmed sighting of Mary Nichols was around 2:30 a.m., just an hour before her body was discovered, walking towards Bucks Row. This narrow window gives us a limited time frame for the attack, suggesting a rapid and brutal assault. The darkness and the relative seclusion of Bucks Row would have provided the Ripper with the necessary cover to carry out the murder without being witnessed. This quick and efficient approach underscores the chillingly calculated nature of the crime. It speaks to a certain level of planning and premeditation, rather than a random act of violence. The initial police investigation, while thorough in some respects, was also hampered by the limitations of the time. Forensic science was in its infancy. Fingerprinting was not yet a widely used technique, and the understanding of blood typing and other forms of trace evidence was limited. This lack of sophisticated investigative tools undoubtedly hindered the police's ability to gather conclusive evidence. They relied heavily on witness testimonies, which were often unreliable or conflicting, due to the chaotic nature of the area and the general fear surrounding the murders. The discovery of Mary Nichols' body sent shockwaves through Whitechapel. The brutality of the murder was unprecedented. Even in this impoverished and often violent district, fear gripped the community, and the name Jack the Ripper, though not yet coined in widespread media, began to circulate in hushed whispers among the residents. This palpable sense of dread would only intensify as more victims emerged, further solidifying the Ripper's terrifying presence in the collective consciousness of Victorian London. The city was now under siege by an unseen predator, and the hunt for the Ripper had begun. The investigation into Mary Nichols' murder, while yielding some clues, ultimately failed to produce a viable suspect. The limitations of forensic science, the chaotic crime scene, and the unreliable nature of witness testimonies all contributed to this initial setback. However, the details gathered in this first case laid the groundwork for the subsequent investigations, forming a pattern of brutality that would become tragically synonymous with the name Jack the Ripper. The hunt for this elusive killer had begun, but the city of London was far from prepared for the terror that was yet to come. The immediate aftermath of each murder amplified the terror gripping Whitechapel. The discovery of Annie Chapman's body, for instance, sent shockwaves through the community. The brutality was evident, exceeding even the grim standards of the district. Her throat was severed, her abdomen mutilated. This wasn't simply a killing. It was a spectacle of violence, performed openly in a public space. The speed and efficiency with which the Ripper operated suggested a chilling familiarity with the human anatomy, possibly hinting at some medical or butchering experience. The fact that he could vanish so quickly, melting into the labyrinthine alleys and dimly lit streets, only heightened the sense of dread. It made the unseen threat even more palpable, transforming the fog-laden streets into a hunting ground. Precisely. The police were under immense pressure. The public outcry was deafening. Newspapers, ever eager for a sensational story, fueled the hysteria with vivid, sometimes exaggerated, accounts. The Whitechapel murders, as they became known, transcended mere local crime. They captured the morbid fascination of the entire nation, and indeed, the world. Each new victim intensified the scrutiny on the police, their inability to apprehend the killer further eroding public confidence. They increased patrols, questioned hundreds of individuals, and followed numerous leads. Yet the Ripper remained elusive. This powerlessness in the face of such brazen violence only served to deepen the sense of fear. The streets emptied after dark, and a palpable sense of unease permeated even the daytime hours.
The fear wasn't simply about the physical danger. It was the psychological impact, the erosion of a sense of safety and security in one's own neighborhood. Imagine the dread of knowing a predator stalked the streets, invisible, unpredictable. The Ripper's actions were a violation not only of individual lives, but also of the social fabric. The murders shattered the illusion of order, exposing the vulnerability of the community and the limitations of the authorities. The Ripper became a phantom, a boogeyman, his very name synonymous with terror. The psychological impact is crucial to understanding the widespread panic. These weren't isolated incidents occurring in remote locations. They happened in the heart of a bustling community, in public spaces that people frequented daily.
This immediacy made the threat intensely personal.
Every woman walking alone in the dark became a potential victim. Every shadow a potential hiding place for the Ripper. The constant fear of the unknown, the feeling of being watched, must have been incredibly oppressive. It's a testament to the profound impact of these crimes, that the fear they generated resonates even today.
The police faced an uphill battle.
The lack of forensic technology, the sheer density of the population in Whitechapel, and the Ripper's apparent cunning made their task incredibly difficult. They were dealing with a criminal who seemed to understand their methods, who moved like a ghost through the back streets and alleys. The fog, so characteristic of London, became his accomplice, shrouding his movements and adding to the sense of mystery and terror. Every clue seemed to lead to a dead end. Every witness account added another layer of confusion rather than clarity. And we must consider the social context. Whitechapel was a district of stark contrasts, where abject poverty existed alongside pockets of relative prosperity. The area was overcrowded, with many struggling to survive in squalid conditions. This backdrop of social deprivation and anonymity likely provided the Ripper with a degree of cover. He could blend into the crowds, disappear into the shadows, his movements unnoticed amongst the throngs of people.
The social chaos, in a sense, became his greatest ally.
The lack of electric lighting in many areas further compounded the problem. The dimly lit streets and alleyways offered ample opportunities for concealment, creating an environment where the Ripper could operate with relative impunity. Darkness became synonymous with danger, amplifying the sense of vulnerability and fear that permeated the community. The very fabric of everyday life was unraveling, as people became increasingly reluctant to venture out after nightfall, transforming the once vibrant streets into desolate corridors of fear. The Whitechapel murders exposed the dark underbelly of Victorian society, revealing not just the presence of a brutal killer, but also the deep-seated social problems that contributed to a climate of fear and insecurity. The case serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of neglecting the vulnerable and allowing such environments to fester. The Ripper's reign of terror, however brief, left an indelible mark on the collective psyche, transforming Whitechapel into a symbol of fear and violence that continues to fascinate and horrify us to this day. Let's delve deeper into the psychological profile we've been constructing for Jack the Ripper. We've touched upon the brutality of the crimes, the specific nature of the mutilations, and the apparent anatomical knowledge displayed. These factors paint a picture of someone with a deep-seated pathology, possibly coupled with a degree of familiarity with human anatomy, though not necessarily professional. The precision and speed of the attacks suggest a certain level of comfort with violence, perhaps even a prior history of it. However, the absence of forced entry at the crime scenes, coupled with the victim's apparent willingness to go with their attacker, suggests a level of charisma or deception employed by the Ripper. This contradiction between brutal violence and superficial charm is a key element in understanding his psychological makeup. Precisely. The Ripper's ability to blend in, to appear unassuming, is perhaps one of his most chilling characteristics. We're talking about a period of intense fear and suspicion in Whitechapel, yet he managed to move seemingly undetected through this highly charged environment. This speaks to a level of cunning and self-control that contradicts the impulsive nature of the murders themselves. Consider the speed and ferocity of the attacks, followed by the almost surgical precision of the mutilations.
This combination suggests a complex psychological dynamic, perhaps a compartmentalization of his personality, who's able to present a normal facade to the world while simultaneously harboring these incredibly violent impulses. This duality is a recurring theme in many criminal profiles, and something we need to consider in our analysis of Jack the Ripper. This duality brings us to the question of his daily life. Who was he when he wasn't terrorizing the streets of Whitechapel?
Did he have a family? A job? Friends? The ability to maintain such a stark contrast between public persona and private actions suggests a high degree of organization and compartmentalization. He had to be able to switch between these two states seamlessly, further adding to the enigma of his personality.
This raises questions about his occupation and social standing.
Was he someone who held a position of authority, someone accustomed to controlling others? Or was he an individual on the fringes of society, able to blend in due to his anonymity? The possibility of him holding a position of respectability, perhaps even one that afforded him access to anatomical knowledge, has long been a point of speculation. Some theories point towards individuals with medical training, butchers, or even those involved in the slaughterhouses common in the area. While circumstantial, these theories highlight the apparent skill and knowledge exhibited in the mutilations. However, we also have to consider the possibility that he was an unskilled laborer, perhaps someone who had gained a rudimentary understanding of anatomy through other means. The limited nature of some of the anatomical knowledge displayed could suggest a more casual, rather than professional, familiarity with human anatomy. This ambiguity further complicates the process of profiling the Ripper. The geographical concentration of the murders within Whitechapel also offers some insights. It suggests a degree of familiarity with the area, perhaps someone who lived or worked there. This localized activity could indicate a comfort zone, a sense of control within this specific environment. It's possible that venturing outside of this familiar territory might have increased his risk of exposure, leading him to confine his activities to Whitechapel. This could also suggest a connection, however tenuous, to the victims themselves. Were they chosen at random, or was there some element of prior acquaintance, however brief? The seemingly random selection of victims, all women living in impoverished circumstances, does present a challenge. While there's no clear evidence of prior relationships between the Ripper and his victims, the fact that they were all vulnerable women operating within the same geographical area could suggest a pattern of targeting. This pattern of targeting, coupled with the escalating brutality of the murders, suggests a possible increase in confidence, perhaps fueled by the lack of successful apprehension by the authorities. This growing confidence might have even led to a sense of invulnerability, which could explain the increasingly brazen nature of the attacks. The escalating brutality, as you mentioned, is a crucial point. The later murders become progressively more frenzied, more mutilating. This could be interpreted as a sign of the Ripper's psychological state deteriorating under the pressure of his own actions and the ongoing investigation. The increasing ferocity could also be a reflection of a deepening pathology, a descent into a darker psychological space where the initial motivations for the killings become further distorted and intensified. This progression of violence is a chilling testament to the depths of the Ripper's depravity, and the fact that the murders abruptly stopped adds another layer of complexity. Did the Ripper die? Did he flee the country? Was he incarcerated for another crime? Or did he simply manage to suppress his urges, disappearing back into the anonymity of Victorian London? The sudden cessation of the killings, without a definitive explanation, has contributed significantly to the enduring mystery surrounding Jack the Ripper. It leaves us with more questions than answers, and fuels the ongoing fascination with this case. The Ripper's ability to vanish without a trace further underscores his cunning and reinforces the notion of a highly compartmentalized individual. Let's delve into the investigative quagmire that surrounded the Ripper case. The sheer brutality of the crimes, coupled with their concentration within a specific geographical area, created immense pressure on the police. Several investigative approaches were employed, from traditional door-to-door inquiries to the then novel practice of criminal profiling. However, the limitations of forensic science at the time, the lack of reliable eyewitnesses, and the dense, fog-laden streets of Whitechapel hampered their efforts. The police were essentially chasing a phantom, a ghost navigating the labyrinthine alleys with terrifying ease. The Ripper case became a stark illustration of the challenges of policing in a rapidly changing urban environment. One particularly frustrating aspect of the investigation was the sheer volume of information, much of it ultimately irrelevant, that flooded in. The police were inundated with tips, theories, and supposed sightings of the Ripper. This influx of information, while understandable given the public hysteria, significantly slowed the investigation, diverting resources away from potentially fruitful lines of inquiry. It's a classic example of information overload hindering rather than helping the investigative process. Sorting through this mountain of data was a Herculean task, and it's conceivable that crucial clues were overlooked in the deluge. The Ripper investigation, in many ways, became a victim of its own notoriety. Compounding the investigative challenges were the taunting communications purportedly sent by the Ripper to the police and press. The most infamous of these is the From Hell letter,
accompanied by a piece of what was believed to be a victim's kidney. While the authenticity of these communications has long been debated, they undeniably contributed to the growing sense of terror and the perception that the Ripper was toying with the authorities. These letters, whether genuine or hoaxes, further fueled public speculation and added another layer of complexity to an already challenging investigation. They represented a psychological game, a macabre form of communication that left investigators grappling with more questions than answers. Several individuals were considered suspects during the investigation, some based on flimsy evidence, others due to public hysteria and prejudice. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant residing in Whitechapel, was one such suspect. While there was circumstantial evidence linking him to the crimes, nothing concrete ever emerged. Montague John Druitt, a barrister who died shortly after the final canonical murder, was another prominent suspect, favored by some investigators. However, the evidence against him remains largely circumstantial and open to interpretation. The lack of definitive proof against any suspect is a defining feature of the Ripper case. The investigation experienced periods of what appeared to be promising leads, only to be met with disappointment. Witness accounts, while numerous, often contradicted each other, reflecting the fear and confusion that gripped the community. The foggy conditions, dimly lit streets, and the swift nature of the attacks made obtaining reliable eyewitness testimony incredibly difficult. The lack of a cohesive narrative emerging from witness accounts added to the investigative puzzle. The Ripper seemed to melt away into the shadows after each attack, leaving behind a trail of misinformation and speculation. The intense public pressure to apprehend the perpetrator led to a series of arrests and detentions, many of which were based on flimsy pretexts. Several individuals who fit the vaguely defined profile of the Ripper were questioned, but ultimately released due to lack of evidence. This reflects the desperation of the police to find a scapegoat, to appease public anxiety, even if it meant pursuing weak leads. The Ripper investigation underscores the dangers of letting public pressure dictate the course of justice. One can't help but wonder how different the investigation might have been with modern forensic techniques. DNA analysis, blood spatter analysis, and other advanced methods unavailable in the late 19th century might have shed more light on the Ripper's identity and movements. However, we are left with a historical investigation hampered by the limitations of its time, a case that continues to fascinate and frustrate in equal measure. The lack of closure, the unresolved questions, these are the elements that continue to fuel speculation and debate over a century later. The Whitechapel murders left an enduring mark on the public consciousness, shaping perceptions of criminal investigation and sparking ongoing debates about the Ripper's identity and motives. The case serves as a reminder of the complexities of criminal behavior and the challenges of pursuing justice in even the most horrific of circumstances. It highlights the evolution of forensic science and the enduring power of unsolved mysteries. The story of Jack the Ripper, though shrouded in the fog of time, continues to haunt us, reminding us of the dark side of human nature and the enduring quest for answers. The Whitechapel murders cast a long, dark shadow over the lives of the victims' families. Imagine the agonizing uncertainty they endured, not knowing the fate of their loved ones until the horrific discoveries were made public. Many of these women were mothers, daughters, sisters, their absence leaving a gaping hole in their families. The emotional and financial strain would have been immense, particularly given the impoverished circumstances many of them lived in. There was no support system in place, no victim services to help them navigate the grief and trauma. They were left to grapple with their loss in a society that often stigmatized and marginalized women like their murdered relatives. The ripple effect of these crimes extended far beyond the immediate families. The entire community of Whitechapel lived in fear, the constant threat of violence hanging heavy in the air. Women were afraid to walk the streets alone, particularly at night. The sense of security was shattered, replaced by suspicion and paranoia. Everyday routines were disrupted, businesses suffered, and the social fabric of the community was torn. The murders created a climate of fear that lingered long after the last victim was found, impacting the social and psychological well-being of generations. The lack of closure surrounding the Ripper case undoubtedly compounded the trauma for everyone affected. The inability to bring the perpetrator to justice left a deep wound in the collective psyche of Whitechapel. The unknown is often more terrifying than the known, and the mystery surrounding the Ripper's identity fueled anxieties and speculation for decades. This absence of resolution prevented the community from truly healing and moving forward. The unanswered questions continued to haunt them, perpetuating the sense of vulnerability and fear. We must remember that these were not just names in a history book. These were real women, with lives, families, and hopes. Their stories were tragically cut short, and their deaths left a void in their community. The emotional toll of these crimes cannot be overstated. It is important to acknowledge the human suffering that lies at the heart of this case, and to remember the victims not just as statistics, but as individuals whose lives were tragically taken. The psychological impact of the Ripper murders extended beyond Whitechapel and reached the wider Victorian society. The case captured the public's imagination, fueling a morbid fascination with the gruesome details. Newspapers sensationalized the killings, often portraying the victims as fallen women, and contributing to the stigmatization of poverty and prostitution. This created a culture of fear and suspicion, further marginalizing already vulnerable populations. The Ripper case also exposed the inadequacies of the Victorian police force and their methods of investigation. The inability to apprehend the killer eroded public trust in law enforcement and highlighted the need for more effective crime-solving techniques. The pressure to solve the case was immense, and the limitations of forensic science at the time became painfully apparent. This ultimately led to advancements in criminal investigation, although tragically, not in time to bring the Ripper to justice. The Whitechapel murders served as a grim reminder of the vulnerability of women in Victorian society. The victims, often living in poverty and engaged in sex work, were easy targets for violence and exploitation. Their deaths highlighted the social inequalities of the time and the desperate circumstances many women faced. The case spurred some social reforms aimed at improving the lives of women, but much more needed to be done to address the systemic issues that contributed to their vulnerability. Even today, over a century later, the Jack the Ripper case continues to fascinate and horrify. It stands as a chilling testament to the darkest aspects of human nature and the enduring impact of unsolved crimes. While we may never know the Ripper's true identity, it is crucial to remember the victims and acknowledge the long-lasting trauma inflicted upon their families and the community of Whitechapel. Their stories deserve to be heard and remembered, not just as part of a macabre mystery, but as a testament to the human cost of violence and injustice. As we delve further into the Autumn of Terror, the investigation, while extensive, seemed to yield more questions than answers. The Whitechapel streets, shrouded in fog and fear, became a labyrinth of speculation. Each new gruesome discovery, each meticulously examined crime scene, only served to deepen the mystery surrounding the Ripper. The police, overwhelmed by the sheer brutality and the mounting public pressure, employed every available resource, from ground patrols to plainclothes officers, yet the phantom remained elusive. The newspapers, fueled by the public's morbid curiosity, published countless articles, theories, and even supposed eyewitness accounts, adding to the confusion and paranoia gripping the city. The phantom's ability to vanish into the dimly lit alleyways and crowded slums highlighted the limitations of the investigative techniques of the time. We are left to ponder: how could one individual inflict such terror and evade capture with such apparent ease? The pressure on the police was immense. The public outcry, fueled by the gruesome nature of the murders and the apparent inability of the authorities to apprehend the culprit, reached a fever pitch. The newspapers, while providing a platform for public discourse, also contributed to the spread of misinformation and sensationalism. Theories abounded, ranging from the plausible to the outlandish. Some suggested the Ripper was a surgeon, given the precision of the mutilations. Others whispered of a demonic presence, preying on the vulnerable women of Whitechapel. Amidst this cacophony of speculation, the investigators painstakingly pieced together the available evidence. Witness testimonies, often contradictory, physical evidence recovered from the crime scenes, and the geographical patterns of the attacks. The challenge was to separate fact from fiction, to discern the genuine clues from the noise. The investigation was a race against time, a desperate attempt to stop the Ripper before he claimed another victim. One avenue of investigation that seemed particularly promising involved a suspect known to frequent the Whitechapel district, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant. Kosminski resided in close proximity to the locations of several of the murders, a fact that undoubtedly aroused suspicion amongst investigators. While eyewitness accounts were often unreliable due to the poor lighting and the general state of panic, certain descriptions of the suspect bore a resemblance to Kosminski's appearance. Furthermore, his documented mental instability raised concerns, leading some to believe he possessed the psychological profile capable of such heinous acts. However, the evidence remained largely circumstantial. Connecting him definitively to the crimes proved to be a significant hurdle for the police. The breakthrough, if it could be called that, came in the form of a piece of physical evidence. A shawl reportedly found near the body of one of the victims, Catherine Eddowes. The shawl was said to contain traces of biological material, potentially belonging to the perpetrator. In recent years, modern DNA analysis conducted on the shawl has suggested a link to Kosminski, although the methodology and the integrity of the evidence have been subject to intense debate within the scientific community. This piece of evidence, while tantalizing, does not provide conclusive proof. The passage of time, the potential for contamination, and the limitations of the technology available at the time all cast a shadow of doubt over its reliability. Despite the circumstantial nature of the evidence and the lack of a confession, Kosminski was eventually identified as the primary suspect. The combination of his proximity to the crime scenes, his apparent mental instability, and the potential link through the shawl led the authorities to focus their attention on him. The lack of further murders following his confinement lends further credence to the theory of his involvement, although it remains, even to this day, a subject of debate among ripperologists. The case, despite the immense effort invested in its resolution, ultimately remains shrouded in mystery, a chilling reminder of the limitations of justice. Kosminski's deteriorating mental state led to his confinement in an asylum, effectively removing him from the streets of Whitechapel. While never formally charged with the Ripper murders, he remained under observation until his death in 1919. The cessation of the murders following his confinement, while suggestive, does not constitute definitive proof of his guilt. The case of Jack the Ripper serves as a stark reminder of the complexities of criminal investigations, particularly in an era predating modern forensic techniques. The absence of a confession, the reliance on often unreliable eyewitness testimony, and the challenges of preserving and analyzing physical evidence all contributed to the enduring mystery. The Whitechapel murders left an indelible scar on the collective psyche of Victorian London. The Reign of Terror, though brief, exposed the vulnerabilities of the city and its inhabitants, highlighting the stark contrast between the opulent facade of the era and the grim realities of poverty and crime that festered beneath the surface. The case continues to fascinate and horrify, prompting endless speculation and debate. Even today, new theories emerge, each attempting to shed light on the identity and motives of the elusive killer. The legacy of Jack the Ripper extends far beyond the confines of Whitechapel and the Autumn of Terror. The case has become a staple of true crime lore, inspiring countless books, films, and documentaries. It serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of society and the enduring power of unsolved mysteries to capture our imaginations. The Ripper case also played a significant role in shaping the development of criminal profiling and forensic science, prompting investigators to develop new methods for tracking and apprehending criminals. So, we arrive at the end of our exploration of the Whitechapel murders and the chilling enigma of Jack the Ripper. We've examined the known facts, the suspects put forth over the years, the social context of Victorian London, and the enduring fascination with this unsolved case. Yet after countless investigations, books, documentaries, and theories, the identity of the Ripper remains elusive. It is a stark reminder of the limitations of our understanding. Even with the benefit of hindsight and modern investigative techniques, the fog of time obscures vital details, and we are left with fragments of a terrifying puzzle that may never be fully assembled. What can we definitively say about the man who terrorized Whitechapel? We can say with certainty that he was intimately familiar with the district. He moved with a confidence that suggests he knew the labyrinthine alleyways and shadowy corners. His ability to vanish after each brutal attack speaks to a familiarity with the environment and possibly a degree of local support, or at least indifference. The precision and speed of his attacks also suggest a level of premeditation and planning. The Ripper wasn't simply a random predator driven by a momentary impulse. He chose his victims, stalked them, and executed his gruesome deeds with a chilling efficiency. This points to a level of calculation that is deeply disturbing. The psychological profile that emerges is equally unsettling. We are dealing with someone who displayed a deep-seated misogyny and a profound disregard for human life. The brutality of the mutilations goes beyond mere violence. It speaks to a rage, a hatred, and a pathological need to dehumanize his victims. And then there is the silence. The Ripper never claimed responsibility, never boasted of his crimes. This silence adds another layer to the mystery, suggesting a calculated avoidance of detection and a chilling self-control. The silence is deafening, isn't it? It allows the fear and the speculation to grow unchecked. It creates a vacuum that is filled with whispers and rumors, with accusations and counter-accusations. In a sense, the Ripper's silence
is as powerful a weapon as his knife. It perpetuates the terror and ensures his grim legacy continues to haunt us. He becomes a phantom, a bogeyman lurking in the shadows of our collective consciousness. And what about the victims? These women, often marginalized and forgotten by society, became tragically intertwined with this dark chapter of history. Their stories, their lives, are often overshadowed by the infamy of their killer. It is crucial that we remember them not just as victims, but as individuals who lived and breathed in the same city, under the same sky, as the monster who preyed upon them. Their stories should not be lost in the fog of speculation surrounding Jack the Ripper. Absolutely. It's essential to remember their humanity. Mary Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly. These are not just names on a list. These are women whose lives were tragically cut short. They deserve to be remembered with dignity and respect, and their stories serve as a poignant reminder of the vulnerability of those living on the margins of society. Their fate reminds us that even in the bustling metropolis of London, darkness could find its prey in the most vulnerable corners. So we are left with a haunting question. How could such depravity exist, hidden in plain sight, within a civilized society? Was Jack the Ripper a unique aberration? A monster unlike any other? Or was he a product of his time? A dark reflection of the social inequalities and hidden prejudices that festered beneath the surface of Victorian London? Perhaps the most unsettling thought is that the capacity for such evil may not be as rare as we would like to believe. That's the chilling reality, isn't it? The Ripper case forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that darkness can lurk within seemingly ordinary individuals. It forces us to acknowledge the fragility of order and the ever-present potential for chaos. And perhaps the most enduring mystery is not who Jack the Ripper was, but what he represents. The hidden darkness within human nature, waiting for the opportune moment to emerge. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying aspect of this entire case. Thank you for walking with us through the shadows. The story doesn't end here. It lingers, echoing through time, reminding us that the darkest truths often hide in plain sight. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant. Goodbye.